we were putting it together, it's like it's changing in real time in front of our eyes. As yesterday, there's another shooting in Minnesota. So we're gonna we're gonna kind of riff back and forth because we're gonna get to the biblical side of it, but we also got the reality side, the government side of it, if you will. Both of them are playing out in real time. It was interesting because one group described the event as, and I believe I'm quoting here, he was shot down in the street. Another group was describing the motive or the action as justifiable in his self-defense because the agent feared for his life. There's such a wide chasm between perceptions there that says something about what we've gotten to today. This is what President Obama said in a speech that was given about immigration. He said, and I believe it was in his second term, if you register, quote, if you register, pass a criminal background check, and you're willing to pay your fair share of taxes, you'll be able to apply to stay in this country temporarily without fear of deportation. You can come out of the shadows and get right with the law. That's what this deal is. Now, let's be clear about what this isn't. The deal does not apply to anyone who has come to this country recently. It does not apply to anyone who might come to America illegally in the future. It does not grant citizenship or the right to stay here permanently or offer the same benefits that citizens receive. Only Congress can do that. All we're saying is we're not going to deport you. Now, by point of reference, President Obama, removed approximately 3 million non-citizens from the United States over 2 terms. More than any president in American history, including the current president, although that may change at the end of his term. The first term, the current president removed about 1.2 million. But this didn't produce any of the response. I'm trying to think of the right word, be measured as careful. This didn't produce anything even remotely similar to the type of response that we're seeing today. Now, that was President Obama 3 days ago, 4 days ago, something like that. The current president said this. He is obviously you can hear this. He said, I said, you got to lighten up on this. We have a lot of heart for people who are in illegally, but they are working now in farms, working in luncheonettes, working in hotels, and we're not. And then it was like, okay, I'm ad-libbing here. That's not where I want to go. He said, we're looking to get the criminals out right now. Well, now when you overlay Obama's statement with the current president's statement, substance-wise, there's not very much difference. But yet the response to these things have become so polarized, so extreme. And this is going to obviously, what do we do as Christians? How do we deal with all this stuff? Some people are trying to say, well, you know, Jesus was, when they fled to Egypt, that's proof that that's the same thing as people coming into this country. Actually, Egypt was part of the Roman Empire. So this was just that, no, it's not the same thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But when we're talking about immigration, it's a symptom. It's not a disease. The disease that, and that might be, I'm trying to say cause and effect. It's a big driver, but it's not the ultimate driver. The ultimate driver is I'm going to propose to you that the ultimate driver is secular radicalism. The notion that we are absolutely opposed to anything that is introduced by the other side. In other words, I've created my truth, you've created your truth. These are polar opposites, and there is no real truth. You see it happen all the time. Charlie Kirk's assassinated. Some people say he's a martyr. Some people say he was taken out by his own organization. That's obviously not a martyr. Some people say that his wife was in on it. Some people say that he was really a time traveler. I'm not making this up. He was a time traveler, and he knew that he was going to get killed, and it was all arranged. I guess he and Keanu hang out on the weekends. I don't know. This is how we've evolved into these very strange positions where nothing is agreed upon anymore. And I think it's because of these worldviews and of secular radical secularism and the if you will, the traditional Judeo-Christian values. They're just gonna conflict. So, what have we seen in the last couple of days? Well, we heard that a kid was kidnapped by DHS and used as bait for the father. That was one side. The other side says, no, we were trying to effect an arrest on this gentleman, and he took off, and he left the kid. He abandoned the kid. So we picked up the kid, we took care of the kid, we brought the kid to the mother, and the mother said, I don't want him. They said, the mother said, no, I'm not taking him. So now, according to this side, the story is that they reintroduced the kid back to the father, who's in custody. He's going to wind up being deported. Probably the kid too, I presume. But that's the kind of which story, where does truth really lie? When it becomes so polarized, it doesn't even matter. If this is 100% true, these people will not believe it. There's one of the best examples I can think of is just the evidence for God. I was reading this thing the other day. God did a pretty good job with it. He's talking about you can't put certain chemicals together without, it doesn't work. The odds of that happening are just almost infinitesimally small. He went through some other things, and the other guy says, well, so you're trying to tell me that an argument from incredulity is the only thing you have as evidence? And I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't even a conversation anymore. These are just radicalized talking points that disregard any evidence and introduce your worldview, which trumps everything. So this guy, that was one story. The other story was this gentleman that managed to lose his life yesterday. Now this is interesting because one of the things that was said during the summer of the Floyd riots is that we need to defund the police, and that came from the very area where this uprising is taking place. They can't be trusted. Now, all of a sudden, I'm watching this and I'm trying to grasp what has happened because it's significant. Now we're talking about we have our highly trained and competent police force that needs to supplant these federal agents that aren't trained and they're operating as thugs. And it's like, whoa, that's a sea shift. In a very short time, we've gone from these people need to be defunded to these people are our heroes protecting us. What's happened? Well, the same things happened there that what happened with the conversation that President Obama was having, where he was trying to say, You're not going to get all of these things. This is what we're going to do. And by the way, we're deporting 3 million people. Now, you don't have to agree or disagree with everything that he said, but the point being is that it's much closer to this side today, much closer than where this side is arguing where we don't want anything. And that's significant. So once again, they're now saying that the gentleman who had the altercation, they use this as they say, well, he's concealed carry. He's concealed carry, and he's licensed. And again, I'm just listening to that because this is the most anti-gun. And it's how do we now we're using justifications. And I'm watching it, and it's the first press conference. The mayor declared that he was essentially murdered. Did not mention that he was carrying a gun. Obviously, that was going to come out. So then it was, well, he's licensed to carry. Now, there are those among us who have license to carry. And you are trained, you are told, you are advised, anytime you have an interaction with law enforcement, you are to do what? You need to know, I am licensed to carry, number one, and number two, I am currently carrying a concealed weapon. Those are the rules of engagement. And they're universal. I mean, this goes without saying. So what we're doing, I fear, is that we're creating such extreme examples of unfortunate incidents, and that's putting it lightly because a man was killed. But we're using those and then going, oh, we now need to defund ICE, which sounds suspiciously like what Minnesota was saying a few years ago. We need to defund police. In the summer of the riots, just a few short years ago, I'm sure you all remember this. It's how we interpret things. And a guy was on TV with a building ablaze behind him, telling people about the mostly peaceful protests. And again, it's this notion of confirmation bias, which is simply this. This is my truth. I will not move from my truth. If I believe that Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and I believe it was the Egyptians because I heard someone say it, it's just natural for us to kind of go that way, isn't it? I mean, if that's where we want to go, you say, yeah, but that's crazy. Yeah? How many times have people bit the apple of, well, I heard, and then the next crazy thing that comes up is just absurd, and people go, must be true because you heard it. I mean, that's how rumors start, right? Rumors. That's why the Bible advises against a wagging tongue. One time we had a junior high dance. Now, junior high dances can, at least at this time, could be described this way. These were extremely insecure carbon-based units. They don't have a lot of self-confidence about themselves. So they would kind of stand around in these little groups, and then erupt into about 5 or 6 seconds of spastic motion that impersonated some sort of dance, and then they quit because somebody's watching. And you could just kind of watch this stuff going on all around, and it was really fascinating. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that all of a sudden people started leaving. Where are you going? Check it out. Parents showing up. What's going on? somebody's got a gun. A gun? Yeah. Ah. So in the middle of all the chaos, and it was now going viral, turn the lights on. Spastic movement stops. And they're all looking at us, and we say, look to your right, look to your left. Do you see anyone that is not a student or someone you don't recognize? Because the only people who were supposed to be at the dance were locals. No illegal aliens. So we found the person who perpetrated this vile act. What were you thinking? You knew good and well there was, and we know the story. You start these things because you get a little boost out of it. And she got some boost out of it. But I didn't say she got boosted. I said she got a boost out of it. That's right.
I speak it.
Yeah. But you get the point, right? How easy was it to start to believe that? And if you really thought there was a gun, would you tell your mother to come pick you up? And would the mother then say, hey, the rest of y'all, it's fine if you stand there and get shot. We're going home. I mean, it's just insanity. And it's because of what we will believe. Another time, they're having a Christmas parade. We're having another dance. There was something about dances and stupidity that just went together. And they said there was a father and a son who ran the parade. He said, they're out fighting. They're what? They're fighting. Sure enough, we went out there, and there they were, father and son, scratching gravel in the middle of the road. I said, what are you doing? And they got in an argument about how they were going to set the parade up. I said, surely we can solve this some other way, right? Now, the gentleman with me, I'll go ahead and name him for prosperity's sake, was a gentleman named Mike Piku. We went out together to investigate the father-son dust-up. We had a good laugh. We went inside. And then Monday, he gets a call from the judge's office. What were y'all doing fighting out in the road? What? Yeah. So this morphed into me and Piku went outside and got it on in the middle of Jackson Street. And it went all the way to the judge's office. And the judge's office felt like it was necessary to call him. And didn't ask, we've heard about the stupidest story we've ever heard. Surely you would like to add to it. No. What they wanted to know was, what in the world happened? As if the jury was already in on this stuff. The ability of the human mind to accept what it wants to believe, what it likes to hear, is without parallel. We can believe the craziest things. And this has a lot to do with, because these are humor stories, but some of these other things are deadly. So what exactly does Scripture have to say about borders? Now, first of all, there's one more thing I need to say before we go to that. One of the outcomes of all of this chaos is chaos. That may sound sort of self-evident, but what I mean by this is your greatest opportunity to affect the largest amount of change is almost certainly going to include chaos. For example, you want to change how FEMA does business? You did it after Hurricane Katrina. Because chaos created this understanding of, oh my gosh, we've got to do something different, because this systematically this failed. The recent flood in South Carolina where the hurricane went through did the same thing. People are, no, we're not doing our business right. So chaos creates opportunity for change. And if secular radicalism is your goal, then chaos is one of the levers you can use to pry that door open. So we went from a president that was deporting over 3 million over 8 terms, border confrontations, border where they actually entertained people at the border were about 300,000 a year. We went from that to where over 4 years we released, nobody knows, somewhere between 6 and 20 million people. It was pure chaos. And you can decide what the motives were for that. That's not the purpose of this, but one of the things that it did was it created such a groundswell of opposition that, number one, it flipped the politics. Not only the presidency, but the House and the Senate. And I think it was largely responsible for it, amongst some of the other things, besides particularly as it had to do with gender roles and that type of thing. I think that played a large role in it too. But one of the things that was happening, somehow or another, we went from that, which was by any stretch of a reasonable evaluation, was at least addressing the problem. It recognized the problem. It was addressing the problem. It was acting upon the problem. Maybe not completely in agreement, but the point, I think we can all agree that there were some things taken. It went to basically come on in. So one of the things that was a byproduct of that were little things like rape tents and little things like rape trees. Now these don't get brought up in the average person's vocabulary very much because you didn't hear about them. But rape tents were just a simple deal. There was about 60 miles of jungle that you had to go through to approach the southern border that most of these people had to traverse. And this is where the brigands just hung out, the pirates, the ne'er-do-wells, because that was their ambush point. And tale after tale after tale of eyewitnesses where a young child, a woman, it didn't matter, 3, 4, 5 men would just line up and rape them in the rape tent. Now we say, well, that's surely we could do something about that. Well, the actions that were being just come across the border were precipitating this. Rape trees were put up at the border crossings, very close to them, where clothing of the people who had been abused would be thrown up into the tree as sort of a, we know you can't, you're not doing anything to us. And if you want to look these up, they're readily available for, this is not just something that came out of my fertile imagination. From October the 20th to 24, 470,000 unaccompanied migrant children came in. The estimates now is that somewhere between 14 and 30 million people have entered in a way that the President Obama would say that can't continue. So it reached a point of chaos, absolute chaos. And the problem with chaos is it's like a Titanic. You can't just say, take a left. Because now what you've done is you put these machines into motion that are going to create more chaos. Because the response to Katrina was chaotic. The response to a riot is chaotic. The response to a fire drill at a school is chaotic. You can say it's not, but it's pretty stupid, isn't it? Okay, when the bell rings, we want you to walk down this hall, take a left, and go out that door. I got a question. What if the fire is on the way that we're supposed to walk out? Well, we hadn't planned for that. So we always made a simple announcement. This is the drill we will follow for the fire because it's called a fire drill. If it's a real fire, all bets are off. With a one simple rule. If the fire's down there, go there. That's the only rule I can give you. Don't walk into the fire. Now, even at the smallest, most micro level of an organization, chaos is going to occur. So the whole point of borders is this notion that we're going to control as much as we can chaos. First of all, Israel was made a nation with defined borders. It was the promised land. Acts 17 says it this way. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him, though he is not far from any of us. Deuteronomy 32 says it this way. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance and when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the people according to the numbers of the sons of Israel. These people knew borders. Numbers 34 says this, command the Israelites, this is speaking to Moses, and say to them, when you enter Canaan, the land that will be allotted to you as an inheritance to have these boundaries, and then goes on to describe it, you will have some of the desert of Zin, and so forth and so on, and et cetera, because it talks about where your boundaries were going to be in the promised land. For people that abuse those borders, Amos says this, for the sins of Ammon, even for 4, I will not relent, because he ripped open the pregnant women of Gilead in order to extend his borders. Let me put this another way. He endorsed abortion because it brought him political power. Radical secularism is now really a little bit more part of the church than we'd like to think it is. Responsibility to the foreigner, because this one's often brought up. When a foreigner, this is Leviticus, when a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. That sounds like, well, okay, there it is. We just come on in. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Here's an aside. What was the first name of Moses' firstborn son? Gershom. Gershom, really. Like Gershom. Why is that significant? Well, because G-E-R, ger, is the word that's translated in Hebrew as foreigner. Ger, so he was saying Gershom, he was saying, my son is born a foreigner in a foreign land. He was in some place called Midian. I think that's about 4 miles south of Satsuma. So what was a ger in Hebrew culture? A ger was a foreigner, someone from outside those borders who entered Israel and met the criteria to remain. If you did not meet the criteria to remain, you were a nekhar, someone that was passing through. So when it says a foreigner, it's speaking in terms of someone who is assimilating into the society. You're not to mistreat them. If you were a ger, you had the right to assimilate, you had the right to intermarriage. One of the things that you were supposed to do was you were supposed to convert to being a proponent of Yahweh, a follower of Yahweh. And then that meant that you had to also follow the laws of Yahweh. The ger was subject to the same laws as native Israelites regarding rest, tithes, and ethical treatment, but usually could not own land. So what we've established here, for example, listen to Leviticus 23, and it starts to make sense now, even more so. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. The foreigner, why would you leave it for the foreigner? Because the foreigner didn't own what? Land. And he needed some kind of a way to subsist. So the notion of borders, what were they? Well, first of all, they were established by God. Second of all, they've been established in a way that in the Old Testament, which is not to say that it can be brought as a complete application to today, but it is saying if you were a foreigner, you were expected to assimilate. You were expected to follow the laws. You were expected to adopt the religion, which we certainly would not expect now. But you get the point. There were expectations that were placed. You were expected to be productive. We will grant you most of the rights that as natural-born citizens that we have, but you're not going to get the entire deal. Because one of the things that Israel protected more than anything was what? The land. Why? Because it was given as a covenant from God. That was their documentation, if you will, that we are on the path, the right path. All right, so this notion that yours, you're at the peril of the person has got more control over you than you have over that person. Assimilation into America is the other day at the economic summit it was very clear message sent to the European countries. You're losing your culture. You're losing your core values. If this were Israel, it would be these people that you are bringing in they are to change. They are to become what you are, not to just become this. Because what is being said is that the assimilation of so many cultures and then we don't keep our core values. And of course, this is true. It's true very simply. Europe has 100 million more people collectively than the United States, and its gross domestic product is below America's. Economically, this is something that will create real impact. It's created, if you're watching it in Minnesota, you see it right now. But I would suggest to you the argument is really not about so much immigration, because at first it transferred over to that because that creates chaos. Before that, it was defund the police because that creates chaos. Before that, it was abortion because that creates chaos. It's the opportunity that chaos presents in order to introduce into a society a change, a shift in how the society responds to these new forces. All right, so what about Jesus then? Well, would he be a border? Would he be a border control guard? And now this is what you've done. The nation of Israel had certain expectations about borders because they were dealing at the national level. I'm speaking purely as what I think is true. I'm fairly confident it's true. But like Paul said in his scripture, I'm just giving you some opinion now. This isn't coming directly from the man. This is a little bit more of some friendly advice. I don't think Jesus gave a flying fig about what country you came from, what the circumstances were that you entered the country, because he was interested in the individual soul of the person. But if enough people are changed individually through their relationship with Christ, the core values that they represent will look much differently than the radical secularism or the radical secularism that is pushing back so hard today against what you could call the traditional Judeo-Christian culture, if you will, where right is right and wrong is wrong. There's certain things that are not acceptable. But now we're to the point, well, that's not what we want, so we will grab anything that is available to us and create a primary point of emphasis to push back, to expand, to deconstruct what has always been norms for 250 years anyway. So at the individual level, I don't think Jesus didn't care about nationalities. He didn't care about immigration. He didn't care about anything. Because they asked him, well, hey, who do you pay? Render unto Caesar what's Caesar's. Render unto God what is God. What did he just say? There's certain things that the government can expect from you, and you're going to give it to them. But there's certain things that God will expect from you, give it to him. That's totally different than this notion of, oh, well, he would be just fine with what's happening. Got to add one more thing to that. A couple of days ago, a week ago, something like that, last Sunday, in fact, a week ago, a church in Minnesota was having a service, which was interrupted by protesters who claimed the First Amendment right. Now, this, I don't pretend to be a lawyer. I did sleep at the Holiday Inn. But I can say this with certainty. There's no such thing as First Amendment rights for a private entity. There is no First Amendment. You can't, if you work for an employee can have a speech prohibition, and so be it, because that's the way it flies. That's just the simple legal side. The second thing is that there is a law that specifically says two things. You can't mess with an abortion or someone trying to have an abortion. That's what one side wanted to put in. And the other side said, well, okay, then we're going to include sites of religious worship, and that's under the same act, which is now a law. So you can't interrupt a religious service. You certainly can't interrupt a religious service in the manner that which it took place. But yet, the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota said, well, I really think this is protected by the First Amendment. Once again, what we've done is we've just disregarded the facts and we've retreated to a position, and then we don't even consider that the facts may contradict our conclusion. How bad can it get? The Attorney General of Arizona just remarked, oh, well, we have a stand your ground law. And if someone is approaching you and you don't know who they are, you have the right to defend yourself. Now, that's about as close to putting blood on a person's hands as you can, because essentially what she just endorsed was you need to go ahead and revolt if the authorities come to you with an issue. There's some people who've even said, well, they don't even have the authority. They don't have any legal authority. This hurts, because as a society, if we can't agree upon the simple fundamental truths, and this is where I hesitate to overreact, because the problem with TV and the problem with social media is it can expand a problem much, much larger than what it actually is. How much press did you see about the celebration of life? How much did you see on that? Thousands upon thousands. But that doesn't pop up. And we know that of all of these opportunities where revival can take place, it has taken place. And so, to be clear, everything that you're seeing now, I think is really a function of this is an opportunity for chaos. We can poke, we can agitate, we can stir up. And it goes far beyond peaceful protest. You don't peacefully protest with a loaded handgun and then resist. And whatever the facts are, and if they turn out to be different than that, because the guys on the other side, if they've screwed up, nail them. But it just, right now, the preponderance, where some of these people want to put all the onus of responsibility on. I've got no responsibility. I can act a jerk. I can do whatever I want to. You shouldn't. I might try to run you down. You should be able to figure out immediately. And as Joe Biden said one time, well, can't you just shoot him in the leg? That was what can you say? If you shot him in the leg, couldn't you just shoot him in the toe? Shoot him in the ear, right there. This is, as Christians, we're called to be moderate, temperate, not overly influenced by crazy talk that puts us in just an extreme camp as where some of these are. But the other thing we're called to is one by one, through Jesus' example. You take a person and you move them to a position where they can actually turn loose of these strongly held beliefs and re-examine truth through a different lens. There was a guy named Antony Flew, A-N-T-O-N-Y. He was the world's leading atheist, by all accounts, the most famous. All kinds of, he was the most cited philosopher, all kinds of things. A lot debated C.S. Lewis, and by all accounts, he really ripped him up pretty good. Towards the end of his life, Flew wrote a book. It's a fascinating book. If you haven't got it, if you want to read, it's a good one. It's called "There Is No God," and then it slashes "no" out and it puts "a" above it. There is a God. And the book was by Antony Flew. And he explains, he said, I just needed to have the courage to examine the evidence and let it take me where it did. That is astoundingly honest, astoundingly unique almost in today's world. He just simply examined the evidence. Not from a bias where he said, no, I've got to disprove it. It's simply just looked at it and said, okay, what does it mean? And he said he shifted. It's a little difficult to tell. I don't think he was necessarily Christian, but he certainly believed in the notion of a God, and he saw great worth in the readings and the wisdom of Christ. But be that as it may, what he did was he said, I'm taking a lifetime that I've dedicated to atheism, and I can see where I need to, if we can do that, if he can do that, the most extreme, then it can be done one at a time, two at a time, three at a time, until ultimately people move from a worldview that is so radical, and it moves towards one that's equally radical, but it's rooted in truth. That, I think, is the biggest problem that we have in a challenge today. Because both the Republicans, the Democrats, they're not necessarily interested in truth. They're not necessarily interested in whether this makes ultimate sense. What they're interested in, where can I shift the power meter? Can I shift it this way? Can I shift it that way? And when that becomes oftentimes, not always, but when that becomes the primary motivator, buckle up, because we are in for some weird times. We're seeing stuff that I never haven't. This is, in my lifetime, unique. I never thought that we would be in a position where we are, that some of these things are now considered normal. The Supreme Court judge can't decide what a woman is. And she's sitting on the Supreme Court. I never thought I'd see that. But that's where that is a suggestion to me that I won't look at the evidence. I'm simply going to follow my biases, and they'll take me to this point where I am secular and I am radical. We really need to quit apologizing for the fact that we believe in a God. We believe in a God that presented a personal Savior. He presented a personal Savior that was a historical figure that intentionally died on a cross, because then he intentionally rose again. We don't need to apologize for that. We need to explain that. We need to defend that. We need to demonstrate how that has changed us. But what we don't need to do is retreat from the public square. For what it's worth, that's what's got Charlie Kirk killed, was the fact that he wouldn't retreat from that. And then the tinfoil conspiracy theorists came in with all the rest of the wildness that is, as mature Christians, we ought to be able to kind of say, no. But when you're watching this chaos play out on the streets, particularly in one area, one state right now, ask yourself, what's the motivation behind it? How can you be so anti-police and then all of a sudden pro-police? How can these things be described? And I would suggest to you that it's really about securing power. And I'll end with this, because I don't think it's a little known fact. There are some within this secular radical side that's decided, you know what we need to do? We need to add a couple of more states to where we'll get some more secular radical people involved. Once we do that, we need to go ahead and we need to form a commission that says what we really need is our 13. We need a baseball team for the Supreme Court. We need about 13 or so on there, because they'll be able to. And oh, by the way, the gubernatorial candidate for California just announced, and what I'm proposing is that you be able to vote by telephone. Nothing about that is questionable from an integrity standpoint. What is the point? The point is about what? Not the agenda. The point's about power. If we get it, we're going to hold it, and we're not going to turn it loose. And we're going to do everything we can to take this process of give and take, of moving the needle from one side to the other side on the will of the people. We're going to exercise all that, and we're going to replace it with our vision of what democracy looks like. And somewhere God's sitting in the midst of all this going, none of this surprises me, because from the history of mankind, from the start to now, all we've done is demonstrate how incredibly stupid we can be. And will this be one more example of it? I don't know. But discernment, wisdom, reflection, all of these are going to be necessary, because the very foundations of the bedrock that has preserved America, they're being chipped at right now. And may, in the midst of all that, may God have his hand upon us, and may we be unashamed to be his representatives in the meantime. So, Father, well, borders are real, borders are necessary, borders are useful, borders have always been borders. People that entered those countries were expected to abide by that country's expectations and standards. They were expected to contribute, not to tear apart. The great American experiment's 250 years old, and the great American experiment is beginning to really be stressed in ways and manners that perhaps have never been there before, because the institutional bedrock of those beliefs is being questioned, that somehow what we need to do is replace God and replace God with government. Give the power to someone else. And that, I'm not a prophet, but I will predict if that ever happens, it won't turn out well. So we ask for your hand, first of all, of just guidance, protection, comfort, reassurance, that we walk with a confidence that can't be shaken, a joy that can't be stolen, and wisdom that only comes from you. We ask that those pieces stay with us to where we do not contribute to the problem by ourselves retreating into some place of a conclusion that we've reached that doesn't have a thing necessarily to do with the real facts of whatever it is we're supposed to be evaluating. So we ask these things, and we ask that your church, because we know in the middle of crisis, in the middle of crisis, chaos, this is when the church has flourished. This is when the church is raised and got its second breath. This is when the church gets its legs. The church has now got a challenge before it. May we be available to meet that challenge.